The topic is poverty, and we're growing a better understanding when we say poverty that there are three types of poverty as we understand it in liberation theology. Poverty, material poverty, want, not having enough to live on. Death before our times is not good. Material poverty is not God's will. It is not why God created the world. It's not something that God wants. This is the result of sin and selfishness, of avarice. This is the result of not relating in a proper fashion one to another. So material poverty is not the will of God, and it's not something to be admired. It's something to be eliminated. The second type of poverty is spiritual poverty, considerably different, exact opposite of material poverty. Careful when discussing poverty, people will frequently jump to think of spiritual poverty and think that we're talking about those who don't have a spirituality. That is not what poverty of spirit is. Spiritual poverty is those who understand their need for God. We are entirely and utterly dependent on God's providence. All that is good comes from God, and God's will is that all good be shared among all God's people. All of creation, all of God's good gifts to the world are for all of God's holy people. This is the belief when we say spiritual poverty. We're saying we realize that I collaborate with God, but it's God who produces the results. So spiritual poverty is good as opposed to material poverty, which is in itself evil and not the will of God. Spiritual poverty is as good as it gets, realizing we need God. God has chosen, in his wisdom, to need us. And so the third type of poverty is voluntary poverty. It's sharing what I have, who I am, with those who are more in need. We are all called, every human being, certainly every Christian, everyone who pretends to follow Christ, desires to be a disciple of Christ, to learn from Christ, is to share what we have and who we are with others. So the third type of poverty, voluntary poverty, is what we think of when we think of religious life. Men and women, lay people, religious as well as priests, will share their goods so that others might have. They will do it out of an understanding which comes from spiritual poverty and not really only as a non-profit. They will do it for spiritual motives. So voluntary poverty flows from spiritual poverty, and it is meant to eliminate material poverty. Material poverty, evil. Spiritual poverty, great good, reliance, utter dependence on God. Voluntary poverty, our collaboration to transform this world, to make it more the reign of God. This is our definition of poverty: material, spiritual, and voluntary.